There are sounds that the modern world has forgotten, buried under the hum of electricity and the roar of engines. But in the mist-drenched corners of Brittany, in the north of France, an older sound remains, a rhythmic, metallic screeching, the sound of dry axle wood grinding against iron. The locals call it the cart of the dead. In the late 19th century, before photography became a common tool, several grainy plates were found in a collapsed stone manor near Morlaix. They didn't show families or landscapes. They showed silhouettes, tall, thin figures in wide-brimmed hats, trailing behind a black carriage on desolate roads. These are the faceless. To understand the Ankou, you must understand the contract of the soil. In Celtic tradition, the Ankou is not a demon or a god. He is a worker. Specifically, he is the last person to die in a parish during a calendar year. His reward for being the last to leave this world is to stay behind for one more year as the reaper's driver. He becomes the cemetery's collector, the one who ensures that no soul is left behind on the road to the afterlife. Look closely at the roads in these old photographs. They aren't just paths between villages. They were seen as deathways. It was believed that, at night, the geography of our world shifts, and the Ankou claims the right of way. If you are a traveler and you hear the creak of wheels behind you, the old law is simple. Do not turn round. Do not look at the driver. For to see the Ankou's face is to realize that your seat in the back of the cart has already been reserved. In this investigation, we are going to reconstruct the journey of one such cart through the archives. We will look at the testimonies of those who claim to have stepped aside as the cold wind of the Karrig passed them by, and we will ask, what happens when the dead refuse to be just a memory? In the archives of the Brittany Folklore Society, there is a recurring theme, the law of the road. In the late 19th century, people didn't just fear the dark, they respected its residents. The Ankou, while terrifying, followed a strict code. He was the collector, a silent laborer of the afterlife. Witnesses from the village of Brasparts describe a specific phenomenon, the Karrig. It didn't always appear as a physical object. Sometimes it was only a drop in temperature, a sudden, localized frost that turned a summer night into a midwinter's grave. If you were walking home and felt the air turn to ice, you knew. You stepped into the ditch. You bowed your head. The Ankou's cart was said to be overflowing in the photos from that era, like the one found in the ruins of the Saint Michel Chapel. The carriage appears oversized, its wheels unnaturally thin. It was said that the wood of the cart was made from the bones of those who died without a name, the faceless ones. There was a ritual among the peasants. When they heard the screeching axle, they would throw a handful of salt or cemetery soil behind them. Not to stop the Ankou. Nothing stops the Ankou, but to show they recognize his authority, to acknowledge that they were mere tenants of the land, while he was the landlord of the eternity. But what happened to those who were defiant? There is a story of a merchant from Quimper who, in 1888, refused to move his horse and buggy for the phantom carriage. He laughed at the superstitions of the locals. His body was found the next morning, perfectly preserved, but with one chilling detail. His eyes were wide open, and his skin was as cold as a stone pulled from the depths of a frozen lake. Not a single mark was on him. It was as if his soul had simply been reclaimed by the driver who refused to be ignored. The second rule was even more terrifying. Never offer a ride to a stranger on a lonely road, for the Ankou often travels with two companions. assistants who walk beside the horses. They are the ones who open the gates. They are the ones who make sure the ledger is balanced. In the old daguerreotypes, you can sometimes see blurry shapes beside the main carriage, figures that the camera couldn't quite sharpen. One of the faceless, waiting for the next name on the list. The most chilling part of the Ankou legend isn't just the cart itself, but how the driver is chosen. It is a cycle of eternal duty that reset every New Year's Eve. In the folklore of the Lyon region, it was believed that the last person to die in a parish before the stroke of midnight on December 31st would not find rest. Instead, they would inherit the wide-brimmed hat and the rusted scythe. They would become the Ankou for the coming year. Imagine the tension in a small 19th century village as the year drew to a close. To be the last to die was seen as a heavy burden. A year of wandering the roads while your neighbors slept. The Ankou was never a stranger. He was someone you might have known, a grandfather, a neighbor, or the town drunk. But once they climbed onto that black carriage, they were one of the faceless. Old photographs from the 1890s often show local graveyards, like the one in the second reference image you see here. These weren't just places for the dead. They were the stations for the Ankou. It was said that if you stood at the cemetery gates at the exact moment of a burial, you could hear the faint, hollow sound of an extra set of footsteps following the coffin. The Ankou's assistants, checking the quality of the soul. There is a documented account from 1894, found in a priest's diary in Tragueur. He describes a young man who died on December 31st at 11:58 p.m. The family was inconsolable, not just for the loss, but for the service their son would now have to perform. For 12 months, every time a death occurred in the surrounding hills, the locals claimed they could hear the boy's specific, limping gait beside the screeching wheels of the Karrig. The Ankou doesn't kill, he merely collects. But his presence is an omen. In these grainy daguerreotypes, the blurred architecture and the leaning tombstones seem to lean, as if the very stone recognizes its master. The scythe he carries is not held like a weapon. It is held with the blade turned outward, as if he is constantly mowing an invisible harvest, a harvest of breath, of memories, and of names that are about to be erased from the world of the living. The Ankou never travels alone. Behind the driver, or walking at the horses' heads, are the two companions. They are the shadows within the shadow. In the rare surviving daguerreotypes of rural funeral processions, you might notice something unsettling. The horses seem to be pulling a weight far greater than an empty carriage. It is said the companions are there to handle the physical transition, to lift the weight of a life into the cart of the dead. One companion is tasked with holding the horses' bridles, guiding them through the invisible barriers between our world and the next. The other is the opener. It is his duty to move the stones, unlatch the gates, and clear the path. In the old records of 1891, a farmer from Plougars New claimed he saw his own garden gates swing open at midnight, though the latch was rusted shut. He watched from behind a curtain as two tall, faceless figures stood in the road, waiting for a third, the driver, to arrive. These assistants are often described as being longer than a normal human, their limbs appearing stretched and thin, much like the distorted figures captured in early, long-exposure photography. They represent the final loss of identity. While the driver changes every year, the companions are said to be more permanent fixtures, spirits who have long since forgotten their own names. In the photograph, we are analyzing the cemetery gate. It stands half open in the mist. To the Victorian eye, this wasn't just a lapse in maintenance. It was an invitation. The companions ensured that the Ankou doesn't have to wait. If a house has a dying resident, the companions are already inside, standing in the corners of the room, waiting for the exact moment the silver cord snaps. There is a chilling detail in the 1895 census notes of a small Breton hamlet. A census taker complained that he could never get an accurate count of certain households. He wrote that every time he looked at up a family through his camera lens, he saw extra figures standing in the background, tall and wearing wide-brimmed hats. When he developed the plates, the figures were there, but the family denied knowing them. One of the faceless, as the caption on your screen says, they are the bookkeepers of the afterlife, and they never miscount. Sound is perhaps the most visceral part of the Ankou's legacy. Before you're seeing the carriage, you hear it. It is described as a grinsement, a high-pitched, metallic shriek of wood against ungreased iron. In a time when every peasant kept their cart well maintained to avoid wear, the Ankou's carriage was intentionally left to rot and scream. It was a warning siren for the soul. In the late 19th century, a group of researchers studying acoustic hauntings in Europe noted that the sound of the Karrig and Ankou had a specific frequency that caused animals to bolt and dogs to howl for hours. It wasn't just a noise, it was a vibration that resonated in the bones of the living. Consider the reference image again. The road is empty, the carriage is black, and the riders are silent, but the image itself feels loud with the history of that sound. Imagine standing on that very road in 1892. The sun has set, the fog is thick, and from around the bend comes that rhythmic, agonizing screech. It tells you that the harvest has begun. Local legends say the Ankou is a meticulous worker. He doesn't just take the soul, he mows it. The blade of his scythe is said to be mounted backward, so that he can cut down multiple spirits at once during times of plague or war. The sound of the axle is the sound of the blade being sharpened against the world of the living. There are testimonies from the Great Winter of 1893, where survivors claimed the screeching of the wheels was constant, echoing from the hills every single night. People would stuff wool in their ears and bury their heads under pillows, not out of fear of death, but because the sound itself was a form of psychological torture. Reminded that the line behind the carriage was getting longer and their turn was coming closer with every rotation of those thin, skeletal wheels. What happens if you are caught on the road when the Karrig and Ankou passes? The archives are filled with interviews with the dying, records kept by local doctors in the 1890s who observed a strange pattern. Those who claimed to have seen the Ankou didn't always die instantly. Instead, they suffered from what was called the soul shiver. In the first photograph, notice the riders trailing the carriage. They aren't just guards, they are observers. Legend says that if you encounter the Ankou, you must stay perfectly still. Any movement, any attempts to run, is seen as a sign that your life is still active and needs to be harvested. There is a story from 1892 of a young woman near Hilgot who was walking home at twilight. She heard the screeching axle and hid behind a stone wall. As the carriage passed, she looked through a crack in the stones. She saw the driver, tall, skeletal, his face hidden by the shadow of a wide felt hat. But the driver didn't look at her. It was the companion walking beside the horses who stopped. He turned his faceless head toward her hiding spot and simply pointed a long, strange finger. She returned home, but within 3 days she had lost the ability to speak. Her family said it was as if her voice had already been loaded onto the back of that black cart. The Ankou is also known for his knock. In the coastal villages of Brittany, people feared the intimate, the 3 distinct raps on the door at midnight. It wasn't a guest, it was a notification. In these old, grainy images of stone cottages, you can almost feel the weight of that silence. When the knock came, the family wouldn't open the door. They would gather in the center of the room and pray. To the Victorian mind, death was a physical neighbor. You didn't just pass away. You were taken by a contractor who had a schedule to keep. In 1896, a local chronicler noted that during the Great Influenza, the sound of the Karrig was so loud that it could be heard even during church services. The bells would ring for the dead, but the screeching of the axle was the real clock that everyone followed. It was a reminder that the world of the living was merely a waiting room, and the Ankou was the only one who knew exactly when your ride was scheduled to depart. The Ankou's influence wasn't just on the roads, but on the very landscape of Europe. If you look at the reference image, the cemetery seems to emerge from the mist like a fortress. These weren't just burial grounds, they were ports for the afterlife. In the late 19th century, there was a belief in death paths, straight lines that connected ancient churches and graveyards. Local farmers would refuse to build fences or walls across these paths, even if it meant their cattle would wander off. To block a death path was to insult the Ankou. In 1894, a wealthy landowner near Quimper decided to build a modern stone granary directly over one of those traditional routes. During construction, the workers reported hearing the sound of a heavy carriage slamming against the new walls every night at 3 a.m. When the building was finished, the grain inside rotted within a week, turning black and smelling of cemetery earth. The landowner eventually went mad, claiming that he could see one of the faceless standing in the corner of his bedroom, holding a ledger and waiting for the wall to be torn down. The geography of the dead is older than our maps, and it is far more permanent. Even the way the trees grow in these old photographs seems to reflect this terror. Notice how the branches in the background of our archives often seem to twist away from the road, as if they're recoiling from something invisible that passes by regularly. The Ankou's wind was a known phenomena, a sudden, freezing gust that only blew along the center of the road, even on a still summer evening. If you were a traveler in the 1890s, your map wasn't just about distance, it was about safety. You knew which crossroads were heavy and which bridges were watched. The Ankou was the guardian of the threshold. He ensured that the dead stayed dead, but he also ensured that the living never forgot where they were going. In these silent, sepia-toned records, the world feels smaller, darker, and much more crowded, with the spirits of those who are still waiting for their turn to drive the cart. As we close these archives from 1892, a final question remains. Where is the Ankou now? In our world of neon lights and high-speed highways, we believe we have outrun the slow, screeching wheels of the stone roads. But folklore is not a set of lies. It is a set of scars left by the truth. In the late 20th century, long after the last daguerreotype was developed, truck drivers on the modern roads of Brittany began reporting a strange phenomena. On rainy nights, near the old crossroads of Brasparts. They would see a dark shape in their rear-view mirrors, a tall carriage, blacker than the asphalt, moving at impossible speeds. When they pulled over to let it pass, there was nothing but a freezing gust of wind and the faint, rhythmic sound of a metallic screech. The Ankou didn't disappear. He simply adapted. The faceless ones from our photographs are still there, standing in the digital noise of our security cameras. Blurred figures that the software can't quite identify. They are the glitch in the system, the cold spot in the smart home, the shadow that moves just beyond the reach of our headlights. To the people of 1890, death was a neighbor you could hear coming. Today, we try to hide death behind hospital walls and sterile statistics, but the contract remains. Every year, on December 31st, as the clock strikes midnight, a new driver climbs onto that black seat. Someone who, just minutes before, was a living person with a name, a family, and a future. Now, they are the collector. They are the one who ensures that the ledger of the soul stays balanced. Look one last time at these grainy images. The carriage on the empty road. The leaning tombstones in the mist. They are not just history. They are a mirror. We are all travelers on this road. And the Karrig and Ankou is always just around the next bend. The axle is dry, the scythe is sharp, and the horses never tire. So, the next time you'll find yourself on a lonely road at night, and the air suddenly turns to ice, do not look back. Keep your eyes on the path ahead. Because in the world of the Ankou, to be noticed is to be harvested. And as the old Breton saying goes, the Ankou does not wait for you to be ready. He only waits for you to be alone. I was Mr. N from Shadows of Europe. Sleep well. If you can still hear the silence.